Hey guys, thought I'd bring you up to date on the status of the fractal productivity development. I'm in my fourth week. There's been 4 weeks since I've really started utilizing or attempting to utilize the system. And this last Saturday, I had a pretty big breakthrough that really simplified things. The way I create processes is I tend to go through a brainstorming phase where I have this vague concept of what I want to do, start brainstorming, start kind of generally categorizing the brainstorms into like concepts and try and formulate what the system's going to look like, which typically is going to be a flywheel or workflow or something similar for me. And so I know my destination eventually will probably be one of those, but I usually start out with just this kind of vague concept of what the actual goal is for the flywheel. And so before Christmas, I was just brainstorming in Workflowy ideas and concepts and potential components of the workflow or the flywheel. And then 4 weeks ago, I actually did a first iteration, kind of an MVP, when I did my weekly planning. And what I ended up with was pretty laborious. I knew it would be originally, when I got started. It always is as I'm working through it. So essentially what I came up with was, like I'd said before, kind of that Groundhog Day concept of kind of painting the canvas multiple times before you actually do the actual painting. Or kind of getting an idea of not an idea, but a pretty crystal clear concept of what I thought the week would look like before I hit print on it. And then did it. And so there was 4 components of it. There was alignment with stakeholders, and all I really mean by that is, what's my family's calendar? What nights are basketball games? What's my wife got on her schedule, and how do I need to interact with that to help her, or be home to take care of the kids so she can go to a meeting or whatever. So getting alignment with my wife about our family calendar and goals for the week and my part that I'm going to play in that. And then updating finances, because obviously finances play a part in what we're doing that week. We're going to be spending money, so kind of getting an idea of what we're going to be spending money on that week. My Scrum planning and workflow, which is all of my tasks, all my projects and the tasks contained inside of them, and kind of deciding what do I need and want to do this week. And so all the tasks, and then my calendar, getting a really clear idea on what my calendar was going to look like. So that first time, and I skipped Christmas. I didn't really do a lot of planning. I just did my basic Scrum planning and tracking around Christmas time. So that first time was before Christmas, and then I did it again 2 Saturdays ago, and then last Saturday. So I'm on kind of my third iteration. It was very difficult, as I knew it would be, that first Saturday before Christmas. I knew it would take me a long time. I was going to be developing the system as I went, as well as planning my week. So it took me most of Saturday to do something that usually takes me 2 or 3 hours. And so I ended up, that week was pretty wonderful, because I had this context of what my week was going to look like. I kind of painted the week like it was what I had hoped for. I really felt like I had this context. I knew what the week was basically going to look like. It was still really clunky, but for somebody like me, on my Strengths Finders test, my number one strength and need is context. Number one. And it's by a wide margin. So actually, for maybe the first time in my life, on a normal work week, knowing what the week was going to look like, just to a large extent, and then moving through it was immensely comforting or something. I just felt like I knew where I was, and that was a pretty great feeling. Instead of exploring seemingly unexplored territory, I was on a path I'd already walked before, and that was really great. 2 Saturdays ago, I didn't have as much time to work through it. I kind of brought, I think, all 4 of those elements, the finances, the stakeholders, the calendar, and the Scrum planning. I brought them all up, but then I didn't really merge them. And I actually made a note in my Fractal Dev node at that particular point in the planning. I've been big bold letters. I'm like, you have to fix this, because once I'd done all that planning, trying to merge everything and make sure that, each task had a place in my calendar, and each calendar had enough space for each task, and we had it was fairly easy as far as the finances went, making sure that all of Gracie's expectations were all embedded in everything, and that everything was a mirror of each other, essentially, from a different perspective. I got to that point and I was tired. I didn't really have the time to devote to it, and so I kind of stopped there. And that next week, I went through the week and I didn't have that context. I just had a general sense of, I've got a bunch of tasks, it's really not merged. And so this past week, so let's jump to last Saturday when I had this breakthrough. Here's the idea that was on my mind. It was 2 different methods of doing a accounting budget, and I've done both of these. So there's theoretical planning and actual accounting, like a planning for accounting. Theoretical, for somebody like me who I don't have a standard paycheck, sometimes I have a lot of money, sometimes I don't have any money. And so I don't have a standard check that I write for wages. I just go do the jobs, pay my expenses, and then I'm left with whatever profit is in the job. And so it's not a standard amount of money that I have each month. So each month I really have to, obviously I have my bills I have to pay, and then anything extra and paying down on debt and all that stuff is something I just have to kind of do as I go along and figure out kind of week to week. But when I sit down, like say at the beginning of the year, or when I have some idea of something I want to do budget-wise, I'll sit down in Excel, write down in each row, a budget category: housing, groceries, clothing, vehicle maintenance, all the, and then all the bills, liability insurance and health insurance, and all the things that in theory I would be either spending money on each month or setting aside money, for Christmas or whatever each month. And when I do it from that perspective, my wife sit down and we're like, okay, how much do we spend on clothes? And we look back historically on how much on average we spend on clothing and plug that into the monthly category line item, and do that for each line item. And we're not extravagant people by any stretch of the imagination, but when we get done and we kind of fund each category like we think is fairly reasonable, and then multiply that month by 12 for like a yearly amount of net profit I would need to create, it's typically way more than I make. I just look at it and think I don't make that much, depending on the year, sometimes by 5,000, sometimes by 30,000. It just depends. So this kind of theoretical accounting of what I would like to spend my money on is not realistic. It's helpful from a lot of perspectives to look at it like that, but it's not real. And that's how I've been doing my weekly planning. I kind of look at my week and think of all the stuff I'd like to spend my time on and all the tasks I'd like to get done that week. But it's not real. There's this other kind of accounting for somebody like me that has irregular income, where I actually sit down and I have some pretty elaborate financial accounting processes that I've used. I use QuickBooks, obviously, but then I've created some predictive cash flow spreadsheets so I can see what my income and expenses are going to be and kind of track those across multiple accounts and stuff. And so basically, once I have updated those, I look at how much money I have right now on hand and what's coming up for the next few months, and then make decisions for the week. Like, okay, here's where we stand. I sit down with my wife, say, okay, here's our bills. Here's our income. Here's what's coming up. Okay, what are we we have to pay these bills. These are our standard bills. Do we want to put some into savings? Do we want to pay down on debt? Do we want to, go on a date or whatever with the money that we have? And so that's kind of the realistic accounting. So as I was sitting there doing my planning for the week, and I got to that place where I had written down, like, here's the problem you have to fix. I was like, okay, how am I going to fix this? I can't make this a real laborious, complicated thing where once I get to this point, I just want to quit every week. I need to make it really simple. And it dawned on me that I've basically been doing my planning like I do my theoretical accounting, which is never real and only limited in its helpfulness. And I thought, okay, what would it look like to do like the real accounting version of my planning? And I realized the resource with accounting is money. The resource for my sprint planning is time. And that's represented by my calendar. And so I could put enough tasks in there to work 37 hours a day, but I don't have 37 hours a day. So I went into my planning for the first time in my life through the lens of my calendar, not through the lens of my tasks. And that made an unbelievable difference. And for some of you, that's going to be like how you automatically do it, and it's going to seem nonsensical to do it any other way, and I don't disagree with that. But I just had never done it that way. I never looked at what are my resources this week, and then what am I going to do with those resources? What the heck? Sorry. I drive by here all the time, and there's a whole bunch of work that's been done really fast. So here's how I did it this week. I laid in all the things that I knew I was going to work on this week, like the things I knew about my week. And then I went through my Scrum tasks and made sure all of those things were accounted for in my tasks. So that was pretty straightforward. I mean, it took me a while because I was working my way through it mentally. But it's like, okay. And then so everything was in my calendar. And this is the calendar I'm talking about. I'll hold it up. I do use Google Calendar for I just track everything in there. But when it comes down to the week, I put it down on paper. And then it literally sits beside me in my truck. Or if I'm at my desk at my house, this is sitting right there to the left of my keyboard. Or if I'm on the job, I've got it pulled out and it's on a table. So it's always available. So I plugged in, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I plugged in pencil and then drew lines down for the time slots. And so I just kind of filled in like, okay, I'm going to be working. I leave my house at 8. I leave the job at 5. So that time is accounted for. I wake up at 5:45, make coffee, and then I have my 12-week year. So that time was accounted for. When I get home, accounted for like supper and showers and all the stuff I do. Plugged in what I do on Saturday and Sunday and kind of blocked all that off. So it was kind of like from using accounting terms, it was like automatically debiting those time chunks and those tasks. Like those are automatic. And then I copied that and printed a copy so I could mark it up and kind of look at, okay, what am I playing with here? And I went through with highlighter and highlighted the discretionary time that was left, and it was tiny. That was the big breakthrough for me. Like I realized, like I get to Saturday, I think about my week, and I feel like I have this whole week to do all this stuff. It would be like me thinking, man, I've got $10,000 in my bank account. What do I want to do? But if 9,000 of that is going to go towards bills, and groceries and the things I always have to do, really all I have to make decisions for is $1,000. not $10,000. And that was a big breakthrough. Like, that's obvious now that I say it, but that's not how I've approached my weekly planning, is isolating just the discretionary times. And so when I looked at that and realized, I've got about 45 minutes on weekday mornings, couple hours on Saturday after I've done my planning and my accounting and everything that I do on Saturday, a few hours on Sunday, and then an hour or two each night. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, that's actually what I need to do my weekly planning for. It was just a few hours, not 24 hours a day, but just about like 8 hours. What am I going to do with that 8 hours? And I kind of glanced at my task list and realized I've got to do my taxes. That takes about 8 to 10 hours. I don't have to do it all this week, but I need to make some headway on my federal and state taxes and my business. Like, I've got to send out 1099 tax forms and stuff to my subs. And I looked at all the things, and that was the obvious thing I needed to get done. And then there was some meetings I haven't had time to get to that I really needed to get to. So I scheduled those for after work. And that was it. I mean, that was basically it. And then a few small tasks, just things that would take 15 or 20 minutes. I can fit a few of those into my week. Now, on my way to work, on my way home, and a few things that I could do at home that were just small little items, repairs and stuff. And so I got to Saturday night, and it was the first time I'd done it once before, but it wasn't as thorough when I did it before Christmas. I had a lot more tasks in my planning than I could account for, but because I went through the calendar, and as I would allocate a task to the calendar, I would make sure that was in Scrum and in the sprint. And so by forcing myself to only allow myself to add tasks that I knew I had time for, and then allocating the time first and then putting the task into my sprint plan, it's probably the first time in my life I've actually had a 95% accurate plan for the week. And I realized yesterday, as I was thinking through how easy that was. I mean, it took me a while because I was working my way through it mentally on Saturday. But next week is going to look pretty much the same. I'm going to have pretty much the same discretionary time, because I do pretty much the same thing every morning, go to work and do pretty much the same thing every evening, and I'm left with the same discretionary time, with a little bit of variability. And that's huge. I'm really looking forward to next week. It's going to take me a while because I'm going to create a template for my week where all the stuff I normally do is just going to be like, I'll use WFX just I'll create a hashtag template or weekly template or something of things I just know I'm going to be doing each week. And I'll just re-tag them or add the tag for the sprint. And that'll be done. And then I'll see what I'm left with and then add in a few tasks. And I think I'm going to turn what has been, 2-3 hours into something that's going to literally take me 15 minutes or no time. I actually am trying to figure out, is there a way I can incorporate this into my daily planning so that by the time on Saturday, like, my next week will already be populated. I'll realize, okay, this particular thing, as I'm going through my list on a daily level, that'll be for next sprint. That's what I'm going to do that next week. So I'll look through, remove all the tasks and put them in someday maybe that I'm probably not going to get to this quarter, and just be left with the things that I really want to and need to get done in the next few weeks, and then pre-populate those weeks, and then just go in and make adjustments. So for somebody like me that does a lot of planning, takes a lot of time to do it, and it's still not really accurate, this is a huge step forward for me, and I think it's going to turn something that I spend a lot of time in my week doing into something that's going to take little to no time, which is going to free up some time. Like, that'll add, if my sprint planning takes me like 15 minutes on a Saturday morning or a Friday night, that'll free up 2 or 3 more hours that I can do more stuff and create more margin. So I'm pretty excited about that. And also, and here's another big breakthrough for me, in realizing how little discretionary time I have would be like, and this is also true of me, if I have a tremendous amount of money in the bank, and sometimes I'll have $100,000 in the bank, most of that is going to be used to pay subcontractors and buy materials. But when I have $80,000, $90,000 in the bank, like, that feels great. But when I actually sit down and say, okay, this, and break it out into my predictive cash flow, and realize, you know what, that money's not mine. Not that I don't know that, but I might think, okay, wow, I really, 10,000 of that is mine. That's a good, that's nice. But then if I go further and actually allocate what I'm going to be spending that money on for my business and personal, and realize, you know what, there's only $200 left when all's said and done, I make different kinds of business decisions and spending decisions. If I just look at it and think, gosh, I have $80,000, I'll go ahead and buy this $400 tool, that's a foolish business decision, because it's not in light of the reality of, the finances. So by realizing how little discretionary time I actually have, like this week when I did my planning, a lot of stuff that I would have just kind of squandered that time thinking I've got all week, when I realized, no, you've got 7 hours and you've got a lot to do, and at least 4 or 5 of those hours are going to go to taxes, and that leaves you with like 2 or 3 hours, and you've got this other stuff you need to do. And I realized, whereas I felt like I've got 24 hours a day to spend, no, you've got like 20 minutes. That's what you're left with at the end of the week, to squander or to do something else with. So anyway, huge breakthrough for me. Really looking forward to next week. I'm actually looking forward to 2 weeks. Next week, I'm going to be doing the work to templatize it. And then that next week, my goal is to see how little time I can spend to accurately get a snapshot of the following week. And then from there, how can I start to build margin into the system and increase margin, not just time margin, but also focus margin, energy margin. How can I increase that and paint a better picture of my weeks and embed more into the week without costing any more in terms of resources. So there you go. There's an update. Pretty excited about it. I feel like that breakthrough alone was worth it, but I think there's more to come once I actually step into that reality and start to build margin. I think that's where the real, I won't right now. I've talked before about what I mean by margin in systems on other videos, but when you go from where I have been squandering margin, it's more like paying, compounding interest. It's flipping where the compounding interest goes. If I'm squandering my time, it's like going into debt and paying compounding interest to somebody else. But once I can find chunks of margin and figure out how to embed more and more margin in the system, it starts to be more like putting money into investment and paying myself the compounding interest. So I don't even know what I mean by that, but here in the next few months, hopefully I'll be figuring that out. But this is the first taste of it, and realizing something that takes me a good bit of my Saturdays can actually take me very little of my Saturdays and do more for planning my week is a step in that direction. So there you go. Hey, as you're listening to these videos, any thoughts or ways that you have, you're way out ahead of me and have already figured out some of this stuff or are figuring out stuff, or tools that you've used, let me know. I'd love to hear more from your experience.